After completing my PhD in molecular neuroscience, I left academia to teach science at a high-poverty, low-income high school because I had no doubt that my love of science as well as my expertise would inspire the next generation of scientists. I could turn a room full of dull and bored faces into joy and excitement when it was time for my class to end. I quickly realized that my love and expertise were not enough.
When I was growing up, my dad was a microbiology professor, my mom a mathematician, and one sister became a PhD MD, and my other sister became a math teacher. And I grew up hating math and science. I loved books, I loved writing, and I was labeled a creative person. I always thought that being a creative person was different than being a math and science person. It was only later in life as an adult that I saw how math and science were creative, and I wished I recognized this earlier. I wondered if things would have turned out differently for me. It's not enough to just be exposed to STEM or have strong content knowledge in the area, or to have hands-on opportunities. Students need to understand how what they're learning relates to things that they're passionate about and that they really care about.
The problem is the way we are teaching science is not reaching all kids. We started developing science curriculum that appealed to all students, especially those that thought they were completely disengaged with science.
What we created started as an experiment. We had both just changed careers to become teachers, and we were working at the same high-poverty, low-income school in the city of Chicago. I was a reading teacher, he was a science teacher. It was difficult to get our kids excited and to find personal meaning in the traditional curriculum. We decided to join forces. What if we could create an interdisciplinary lesson to connect science and literature? What we started doing was working. Kids were getting excited, students who hadn't participated before were engaged, and it worked especially well for diverse learners as everything became tactile and visual. Students were learning science in a way that related to things that they loved and cared about. While we were both still teaching, we created an incubator space in Chicago, where we were able to create even more and try out these lessons at a broader scope of students beyond our own schools. And we were able to incorporate more subject areas. What if we took the stories that kids were most passionate about and made them more interesting using science? We make science kids' favorite subject by pulling science lessons and experiments from literature and popular culture. As we find out what works, we work with teachers to bring this type of learning back to their own classrooms. Today, we want to share how you can start implementing this type of learning too. We're going to show you how to use the power of stories to connect more students to STEM lessons, how to make any lesson into a STEM lesson, using your existing lessons to incorporate STEM, and how to get students genuinely excited about STEM and creating their own self-directed inquiry. We want our science lessons to go beyond memorization and rote learning. Everything we do, it starts with standards, but nothing's ever just a random lesson. But learning has a purpose in their world and with things that they're passionate about. Anytime we start planning a lesson, we ask ourselves these three questions. What are my students already passionate about? How can I use my lessons to connect to that? And what do I really want my students to learn?
We were working with a teacher in a 4th grade classroom who was using the standard to examine structures and processes in organisms. But she was bored with her own lesson, and she wanted to work with us to create something new. In her lesson, kids were learning about structure and function through different bird beak sizes and shapes based on diet. Now imagine if you taught a lesson on adaptations based on dragons. Kids were surprised to learn that dragons from the How to Train Your Dragon movie were based on characteristics of real animals. We told them how animators had to attend flight school during production, where they studied flight physics and movements of different creatures for realism. Also, the behavior and personalities for the different dragons were inspired by dogs, cats, and even horses. We began the lesson with a reading on the official description of Night Furies from the School of Dragons website. The description included certain traits such as being jet black in color, having bat-like wings that were 45 feet long, retractable teeth, nocturnal, and using echolocation. Then students were asked the following questions. What are its adaptations to its environment, to evade and combat predators, and to find and eat prey? Students then brainstorm and discuss characteristics of other dragons that they know about, or ones they imagine, and the importance of these characteristics to its environment, predators, and prey. We had a project working with a 6th grade teacher who wanted to get her kids excited and engaged about genetics. Like many teachers, including myself, we use a chart like this to teach reproduction and genetic variation. We would do a class survey to give this lesson a real-world application, or we would make these little creatures with marshmallows called rebobs. But our revised genetic lesson connected the standards to something our kids were already passionate about: Harry Potter. The premise of the lesson, the pygmy puffs were selling out at the Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. And Fred and George Weasley were looking for breeders to help them keep up with the demand. Students were given cards for alleles on sex and eye color from the parent pygmy puff population. They would pick one allele card on random from each parent to determine the sex and eye color. Using different colored palms and colored googly eyes, the students would create the pygmy puff offspring. Students got so excited that they would breed their pygmy puff offspring with other students to create these large extended families.
While I was a reading and English teacher, I was also a diverse learning specialist. If you aren't familiar with that, it means that I worked with special education students. We had a shortage of teachers at my school, so one year they changed my position and I found myself teaching advanced algebra in a classroom with diverse learners. I had always hated math, and so did my kids. They were not engaged. I was able to see the class through an English teacher's lens when I realized there are stories in math class, story problems. And I know we all cringe because typically they don't make sense. We used our story problems to get kids really excited about math. We created backstories. There was a reason that they needed to figure this out, and the reason was a zombie apocalypse.
We immerse students in a dystopian zombie apocalypse where they use math and science to choose your own adventure and make choices to continue their storyline. Students were sorted into survival camps, created their persona, and earned skill points and survival points by making wise choices. These choices led to a lesson. They learned parts of the brain to predict the characteristics of the zombie they will encounter based on the areas of damage. Will it be a slow zombie who's not hungry, or will it be a fast and angry zombie? They are challenged to find a way to filter pond water into clean drinking water. They calculate the velocity of different types of bows and arrows. They solve story problems to predict how far the zombies are. They learn anatomy to learn how to care for different body parts and rotting limbs when they become a zombie themselves.
While we use stories to engage students in STEM, we've also learned how to enhance the stories and history that we're already teaching using STEM. We pull STEM lessons from literature and history. We do this by looking at the story or situation and identifying where is there a problem to solve, and where would we need to know about the science or math to be able to solve this problem. We were challenged to see if this kind of learning would work for pre-K kids. We created a program for kids that were 2.5 to 5 years old where we read stories and we pulled the science lessons from the stories. In this example, we used Dragons Love Tacos, but the problem is,
we created a chemistry lesson based on acid-base reactions, where the kids thought about the salsa and what is happening in the dragon's stomach. The students would make different salsas and test what happens to the dragon's stomach and which one causes the dragon's stomach to erupt. We worked with a 5th grade history teacher to add on to our initial lesson about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower. To begin, we expanded upon their initial information about the Mayflower to include that it was originally a merchant cargo ship carrying wine and other goods, and it had to add additional passengers to their ship. In addition, the ocean was full of dangers, including pirates. In one lesson, the students were challenged to use the blueprint of the Mayflower to completely redesign the layout so that it was better suited as a passenger ship for all the passengers as well as the cargo and livestock, including ammunition. In a math lesson, the students were taught about how to calculate speed using a Dutchman's log, like they did on the Mayflower, using a skateboard and rope with knots tied at uniform intervals. In an engineering lesson, students learned about the laws of motion, buoyancy, and flotation, and created sailboats that they raced against each other using fans and 10-foot long gutters. As you can see, this unit on the Mayflower incorporated history, design thinking, math, and science and engineering.
We use STEM lessons to make complicated texts more tangible and interesting. When I was teaching Shakespeare, a lot of students struggled. We created units that brought these stories to life using science. We had done it with Macbeth, and here's an example of how we created a whole CSI Verona unit for Romeo and Juliet.
In my biology class, we used this opportunity to teach a unit on body systems and toxicology. and had students imagine themselves as forensic toxicologists. And this frantic young guy named Romeo approached them with an unknown liquid that his girlfriend Juliet has ingested. In this scenario, Romeo was level-headed rather than impulsive. The students learned about how certain real and fictional toxins and potions impact different body systems, and they performed a drug spot test using spot well plates to determine the identity of the liquid from a set of known fictional poisons and potions.
We continued this in the classroom by seeing if anyone had acted differently, could the lives of Romeo and Juliet have been saved? Students worked in groups, and each of them had a mugshot of the characters, and then they had to go back to the text to find quotes to show if they might be guilty or innocent. Then we used casebooks. And each student, they heard from the other groups and finally wrote a 5-paragraph essay to show how their lives could have been saved if someone had acted differently.
We really believe the way we could revolutionize the way we teach is that STEM lessons are not self-contained, but they expand upon or incorporate history, geography, reading, writing, music, art, and all the other subjects. To further our mission and to help others better incorporate STEM, we want to provide free support and resources to get you started or enhance your lessons if you connect with us here.
Right now we have a YouTube channel where we're adding lessons every week to give you an example of how to do these types of things in your own classroom. If you subscribe to our channel, you'll be able to get all of the updates.